This is a demonstration of the MailChimp Automation tool. To start, let's bring up the application. So first, let's define what this tool is all about. This application was built to help Goldmine users automate the process of sending emails to the customers using MailChimp when changes are made in Goldmine. So normally when you want to send emails using MailChimp in relation to Goldmine, you would have to export your email addresses, upload that to MailChimp, and then trigger your campaigns in MailChimp. So what this utility will do is to automate most of that process. So let's begin by just taking a look at a particular setup that has been defined for us. We have here two automations that I built for demonstration purposes. We're going to open one of them, and what we're seeing here is a setup that is looking at a MailChimp automation named Product Request 1, and it has dependency on a Goldmine query. Called Product Request Automation 1. So what it does here is it will try to run the query in Goldmine, get the data back based on the result of that query, use that information to update the list in MailChimp. The list would contain the email addresses and contact information, and then it has a post action section here, and we're telling it to generate a history item once it has sent the email, or at the very least once it has made a request to MailChimp to send the email. So this tool is not the one sending the email, so you will really have no knowledge of when exactly which second the email was sent. All it does is it asks MailChimp to send an email to a particular email address based on what it has uploaded to the list. There's also another automation item here, item number 4, and this is for Product Request 2 automation. It also uses a query that's composed in Goldmine called Product Request Automation 2, and in this case the action that's performed after the request to MailChimp in regards to sending the email is completed. It's going to update a user-defined field to a particular value. In this case, we are updating a user-defined field called usent2, and it's going to update it to SNT. So there are a couple of elements here that we may need to look at first to fully understand how this is going to work. So first, I've been saying the word automation, and this is really something that the application does for the user to automate the sending of email based on data that's in Goldmine. But this is also something that needs to be created in MailChimp. So to fully set this up, we have to be in MailChimp, and there is a feature in MailChimp called Automations, And to create an automation in MailChimp, you have to go to Automate, Email in this case because we are going to be using emails. And as far as the MailChimp automation tool is concerned, we want this automation email to be based on an API, because the tool is going to be making the API call to MailChimp to send the email. So we're going to select API 3.0 and we can give it a campaign name. Now, this is really similar to creating a campaign in MailChimp. It just so happens that we are telling it how it should be triggered. So in this campaign, we can say this is just a demo automation, and we select an audience. So this is the list that the tool will be updating or will be uploading to. So you can use any list. In this particular case, I'll just use the default list for this demo. And then if you click begin, so for automations in MailChimp, they have this concept of delayed sending of emails. So even though the software might have asked MailChimp to send an email in the morning, it might not send the email until after a day or some time in the future. So for example, in this demo automation configuration window, if you notice, there's this trigger. It says trigger 1 day after an API call. So that means that after we sent a request to MailChimp to send an email, it will wait until the following day. So we can change that to either immediate, which means that when we make a request, MailChimp will send it right away, or delay that by an hour, or whatever interval that you prefer, whatever works within your process. So I'm going to leave it for now as 1 day. I'll delete it for now, and then if you hit next, you're able to see that this part of the process really requires a combination of setting up the MailChimp automation tool and also properly setting up the automation settings in MailChimp. So in the email, we have to define our subject line, because this is essentially a regular campaign. I'll just say it's a welcome letter, and we'll hit next, and we're going to just build a basic layout here. Okay, and I'll save that, continue with the setup, next, and we're still missing a few settings. Default text content, and let's fix that. Guess it's this one. continue that. All right, so everything seems to be in green status, which means everything has been set up properly, or at least all the required information is completed. So we're going to click on Start Sending, and we're going to confirm that. All right. So that new automation in MailChimp has been created, and this is something that the MailChimp automation tool can use. So we switch back to here in the MailChimp automation tool. There is an option here to create a trigger automation. So I'm gonna click that, and now I can see the demo automation that we created in MailChimp. So you would typically select the automation that you created in MailChimp. You would select the user that has the SQL query that is in Goldmine, and you pick the SQL query that pertains to that automation or campaign that you will be sending for this particular automation. So we'll take a look at this SQL query in a moment, and then if we decide to update a field, I can say we can update a field called user defined 1011, and we can have a value of just X, just maybe to mark a field that something has been done. There you go. So I can save that, save successfully. So now if I go here, I now have my new trigger automation ID of 5. So I can also delete that, so we can just delete it as well. There you go. So back to one of the predefined automation for this demo. I mentioned earlier that this setting requires a Goldmine query. So this is going to be a SQL query that's defining Goldmine that provides the information for the contacts that needs to be sent to MailChimp. So let's take a look at that one. So all right. So SQL Automation 1. So this is the query that's in Goldmine. So if I run the query, I get one record. So it found that record. So let me take a look at that. So we can all read it because it's a little bit small in the screen. Okay, this is a little bit better. All right, so this SQL query is simply getting all the information for a contact with the particular product information. We have the contact name and last name and the first name, and these three fields are required. So the SQL query should always return these three fields at least, including that contact account number, contact one, that account no. You would have to also compose to get the email address. In this case, it's getting it from the concept table, and this condition here is simply saying this is the primary email address, and we'd like to get the contact data where we have populated product 1. Somebody had let's say, made a request for product 1, and that we haven't sent it yet. So this is the flag for not being sent. So that corresponds to this view. So we have a request 1, and in this case I have somebody called in and said, I want some material for these 2 products, and at the moment we haven't sent it. So this is the one that is showing up as a result of this SQL query. We have a syrup and soda. So when this runs in Goldmine, we have this result, and this is going to be the one that's uploaded to MailChimp, to your MailChimp list, with this particular email address. So let me update the email address for this user, or for this contact, and let's just change that to 10. Okay. So if you put them together, this is what you will come up with. We have to first define our automation in MailChimp. They call it this way, and we did that by creating this demo automation. The second is you have to be in Goldmine, create the SQL query, make sure that it works. You compose that in Goldmine, and then once that is working, you can go back to the tool and then select the query name that you created in Goldmine. You can then specify what do you want to do after the email request has been sent to MailChimp. So in this example, I'm telling it to create a history record. So just to double check before we do a test run, this is the test contact record. We have an old history here. It's a test that was made yesterday, so I can just delete this so we can clear it up. And then we can go back to the tool. So we are going to expect that we have a history named send product request 1 as a reference from user Sean, and the history type is an action type. The other part of this automation is going to be the scheduled tasks. Now, this is just the UI for composing the configuration to perform all that automated process. On the back end, either one on the same machine where you are usually working on with the MailChimp Connect automation tool, or maybe you can have this tool on a server where you can schedule the task processes that needs to be run at a certain interval. So let's take a look at this scheduled task here. So what it's doing is this one is going to execute an application called automation runner console.exe. So that's a separate exe from this application. There is another exe or application file that is going to be used to automate or to read the configuration that we created in the UI and execute those. And what it's doing here is we have a parameter number 3, and that corresponds to this number, the ID. So what we're saying is when you execute, read the settings from ID number 3 and perform the operations defined in that automation. And then we're going to tell it to where the default folder is, and typically that's the same folder as where the exe is, so you just have that same value provided here. So for this test, we're should be receiving an email. So right now my inbox is empty, and if I go here and just execute this, notice it's green. Means it's all good. If you see something red, then that means there's an error. But it's currently going through all the steps to automate sending the email. Okay, seems to be done. So when we do that, let's go here to the product request 1, and notice that there is one subscriber in here. It says one subscriber in queue. So if I click this, it's going to tell us it's the 110, dexter.baga plus 110 at gmail.com. So since our automation was set up to send later, not immediate, then it will wait for that time, and then it will send it. So let's take a look at setting that up. Let's see. Here you go. Okay, I think I did set up this one as immediately sending it. So if I refresh this, we have the email, and if I open the email, it did have the product merged into the email. We requested syrup and soda, so this is syrup and soda, and we're going to go back to Goldmine, and I'm going to refresh that, and now we have a history generated for us for the product request that was sent to MailChimp. There you go. So another test that we can do is, I have here a product request number 2, water and sugar, and this is going to be triggered by another automation. So what happens is that if you have a particular set of email, like this one would contain these 2 products, you would have to build a different automation for each one of them. So if you have 5 products or 5 product request items, then you would have 5 automations in here, meaning you will also have to create 5 of these automations in MailChimp, one for each, in this case one for each request. So this request number 2 is really this product request 2 here, and we are using a different SQL query called product request automation 2, and it's very similar to the first one. The only difference here is that it's looking at a different field, in this case uProduct 3 as opposed to uProduct 1. It's looking for a user-defined field called uProduct 3 to know that something has been entered in the product request 2 tab, and that we haven't sent it yet. So if I run the query, it gets the same email over here. So the customer called again and said, I also want this once. So what we're going to do is create another scheduled task, and you'll see that the parameter here is number 4, and that corresponds to this ID here, number 4. So if we send it, we run this, and while waiting for that, we're going to go to here and product request 2. Let's see if we have the subscriber come in already. Yeah, so the second one came in, and this is for the product request 2, which is, we have here water and sugar, and that's what we have in Goldmine. The customer said, I want some product information for these 2 items. The difference though is that this field was updated to SNT, as opposed to the first one. All we were telling it was create a history record here. So this one updated the field. So if we go back to the SQL query and run it again, it won't find the record anymore because we already have sent it. So you can have more of these tabs of different product data, and as long as you have created different automations for each one and sending an email to each automation, and that should work properly. Also, each automation these automations can use the same list or audience list, and that list essentially have a limit of 30 fields, I believe 30 fields. So each automation or campaign can use those fields or reuse the fields, but I would suggest that for product 1 you name you just keep the product names as the same field name, you product 3 and 4 in this case. So you will have a list for one email address with a field of you product 1, you product 2, you product 3, 4, 5, and so on. But you're limited to, I believe, MailChimp limits the number of lists to 30. So if you run out of fields, then you would have to create a new MailChimp list, audience list, and use that for the automation. Then of course, from that point forward, you could just track everything in MailChimp as far as unsubscribes and the status of the campaign. This is going to be in so this is set up to run in Task Scheduler, and you can make it run every 5 minutes or every hour and so on. But if you just really want to be able to manually run this as well, you can, and that is, you can have just a shortcut icon on your desktop, and you basically have a command saying run it, but pass in that ID at the end. There's the number 3 at the end of this one, and it works the same way. So this, alternatively, if this is just something that you want to do at the end of the day and you don't need to bother about scheduling it, but at the very least somebody can just simply double click it and then run it manually, then you can do it this way as well. Um, there. So to recap, so we have a tool that you can use to create or set up automating the process of sending data to MailChimp and telling it to send emails to customers based on the result of a goldmine query, um, and then start monitoring the results or the progress inside MailChimp. One last thing is in the integration settings section. This is where you would have to define your MailChimp API key. You can retrieve this from the MailChimp console. You would have to define where your goldmine is installed, and your username and password, and your SQL Server information needs to be provided as well. This allows the application to know where to get the data, how to securely connect to MailChimp, and properly update your data in Goldmine. There's also a way to view logs generated by this UI application. This does not keep track of the logs for the automation console that has its own logs, but if there's any, for example, any error that you encounter in the UI and such, then it will be added to the log, and that can be used for troubleshooting purposes. I think this is all that I can demonstrate for today. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to support@dbxintegrations.com.